You walk past your neighbor's yard in July, his grass is brown, crunchy, dying, yours is green, thick, soft under your boots, and you haven't watered it in 3 weeks. That's not luck. That's a trick the Amish have been using for over 100 years, and the lawn care industry would lose billions if every American homeowner knew it. I'm going to show you exactly how they do it. No sprinklers, no chemicals, no $200 bags of fertilizer from the big box store. Just one simple practice they brought over from the old country, refined on Pennsylvania soil since the 1840s, and quietly perfected while the rest of us were sold a lie. And stick with me until the end, because there's one specific technique recorded in a 1923 Lancaster County agricultural survey that almost nobody alive today has heard of. It works on any yard, in any state. Even if your house was built in 1962 and your soil is hard as concrete, you don't need new construction, you don't need acres. You just need to know what they know. The first time I drove through Holmes County, Ohio, in late August, I pulled over because I thought I was looking at a painting. Field after field of green, lawns so thick they looked carpeted, and not a single sprinkler head in sight. I was 53 years old, and I had spent my entire adult life dumping money into a yard that browned out by the 4th of July every single year. I knocked on a door. An older man named Eli came out, wiping his hands on a rag. I asked him point blank, "How is your grass like this in a drought?" He smiled the way you smile at a child who just asked why the sky is blue. He said, "We don't fight the summer, we prepare for it in the fall." That single sentence rearranged everything I thought I knew about lawn care. See, the conventional American approach to lawns was invented in the 1950s by chemical companies. Scott's, ChemLawn, the whole industry. They sold us a system: spring fertilizer, summer watering, fall fertilizer, repeat forever. It costs the average homeowner between $400 and $800 a year, and the lawn still dies in August. The Amish never bought any of it. They were already here, growing the healthiest turf in North America, using techniques their grandfathers brought from Switzerland and the Rhineland in the 1700s. And the first thing they do, the foundation of everything, is something so simple that when I tell you, you're going to be angry. Nobody told you sooner. They top dress with composted horse manure in late October. Not spring, not summer, October. A 1/4 inch, raked in lightly, right before the first hard frost. Penn State Extension confirmed this in a 2014 soil study out of their University Park research station. Lawns top-dressed with composted manure in late fall showed 43% better drought resistance the following summer compared to chemically fertilized lawns. 43%. That's the difference between green and dead in a July without rain. The reason is simple. While your neighbor's grass is going dormant for winter, the roots are still active underground for another 6 to 8 weeks. They're pulling nutrients down deep, building a root system that can hit 12 to 14 inches by spring. Chemical fertilizer in spring only feeds the top 3 inches. That's why those lawns die the moment the surface dries out. But here's where it gets interesting, because the Amish don't just stop at fall top dressing. They do something else, something the chemical industry has spent 70 years training us not to do. They cut their grass tall, 4 inches, sometimes 4.5, never lower than 3.5, even in the height of summer. I know what you're thinking. Tall grass looks unkempt. The HOA will fine you. Your neighbor will complain. I thought the same thing. I cut mine at 2.5 inches like every man in my neighborhood. And every August, my yard turned the color of old hay. A Cornell University turf study from 2008 measured soil temperatures under grass cut at different heights. Grass cut at 2 inches allowed soil temperatures to hit 95 degrees on an 85-degree day. Grass cut at 4 inches kept the soil at 78. That 17-degree difference is the entire reason your lawn dies. The roots cook, the soil moisture evaporates, the grass goes into survival mode, and then it just gives up. Tall grass shades its own roots. It holds moisture. It chokes out crabgrass and dandelions because weeds need sunlight on bare soil to germinate. The Amish figured this out generations before Cornell put numbers on it. Now, here is where the story takes a turn that made me genuinely angry when I learned it, because none of this knowledge was lost by accident. In 1954, the United States Department of Agriculture published a homeowner's guide called The Suburban Lawn. It recommended cutting grass at 3.5 to 4 inches and using organic top dressing in fall. That guide was quietly pulled from circulation within 10 years, replaced by pamphlets co-authored with chemical company researchers recommending shortcuts and spring synthetic fertilizer. Someone benefited from your ignorance. And they didn't stop there. They funded the extension programs, they wrote the magazine articles, they sponsored the television shows. By 1975, the average American homeowner had been completely retrained to do the exact opposite of what works. The Amish just kept doing what they'd always done. They didn't watch the television shows, they didn't read the magazines. They preserved the knowledge because they never lost it in the first place. Now, if you already own a house and you are thinking this only applies to people building from scratch or starting a new lawn, stay with me, because this next part is specifically for you if your yard is 20, 40, 60 years old and the soil underneath is compacted clay. You can fix it. Not in one season, but faster than you'd believe. The Amish technique is called rolling renovation, and it works on any existing lawn without ripping anything up. Here's what you do. This October, before the first frost, you rent a core aerator from any hardware store for about $70 for a half day. You pull plugs across your entire lawn. Then, the same day, you top dress with a 1/4 inch of composted manure, or, if you can't get manure, a high-quality leaf mold compost. You rake it into the holes. You water it in once if there's no rain in the forecast. That's it. That's the entire fall step. In spring, you do nothing. No fertilizer, no weed and feed, nothing. You just let it wake up. By June, you'll see your grass thicker than it has been in years. By August, while your neighbors are dragging hoses around at 6 in the morning, your lawn will still be green, and next October, you do it again. Year 2, the transformation is undeniable. Year 3, people start knocking on your door asking what you're doing, and listen, what I just showed you is one technique from one corner of the buried archive. The full system, the heating methods, the root cellar pantry tricks, the cooling rigs, the pest control mixes they pass down without writing a word. I put it all into a 3-volume collection called the Complete Field Vault, and there's a special limited time offer on it running right now. It's linked in the description, and you can scan the QR code on screen because this knowledge was taken from you and you have every right to take it back. Now, back to your lawn, because there's still one more layer the Amish use, and it's the one almost nobody knows about. They never bag their clippings. Never. Not once. Now, you've probably heard mulching mowers exist. You may even have one. But here's what nobody tells you. The mulching effect only works if the grass is tall enough that the clippings are small relative to the canopy. Cut short, mulched clippings smother the grass and form thatch. Cut tall, those same clippings disappear into the canopy within 2 days and return roughly 30% of the nitrogen the lawn needs for the entire year. Free, no bag, no fertilizer. The University of Arizona did a study on this in 2011 inches residential lawns across Tucson. Homeowners who switched to tall-cut, mulched clipping, no synthetic fertilizer routines saw an average reduction in water usage of 52% within 2 seasons. 52%. In Arizona, in a desert, if it works there, it works in your yard, wherever you live. Now, I told you at the beginning that there was one specific technique recorded in a 1923 Lancaster County agricultural survey that almost nobody alive today has heard of. This is it. This is the secret I promised you. And it's so simple, you can do it this Saturday. The survey was conducted by a man named Howard W. Kriebel, a Pennsylvania state agricultural agent who traveled through Amish farms in Lancaster County documenting their practices for a state report. Most of his findings were filed away and forgotten when the chemical revolution took over after World War II, but one practice he recorded has been preserved by a handful of families in the same valley ever since. They called it the autumn brew, once a year, in mid-October, right after the first cold snap, but before the first hard freeze. The Amish would prepare a simple liquid feed for their lawns and pastures. They took a 5-gallon bucket. They filled it 3/4 full with rainwater, never well water, and never municipal water, because the chlorine kills the microbes. Into that bucket they added 1 shovelful of well-aged composted manure, a handful of wood ash from their stove, and a single cup of unsulfured molasses. They stirred it, They covered it loosely with a cloth. They let it sit for 48 hours in a barn or shed not in direct sun. After 2 days, that bucket contained one of the most powerful biological soil inoculants ever documented. The molasses feeds the soil bacteria. The wood ash provides potassium and raises the pH just slightly to favor grass over moss. The composted manure introduces the microbial life that builds long-term soil structure. They then diluted it, 1 gallon of Brew to 10 gallons of water, and they applied it across roughly 1,000 square feet of lawn using a simple watering can. That one application, done once a year in mid-October, replaces every synthetic product on the market. Kriebel wrote in his 1923 notes, and I'm quoting from a transcription preserved in the Pennsylvania State Archives, that the Amish farms he visited had soil organic matter levels 3 to 4 times higher than surrounding English farms using commercial fertilizer. 3 to 4 times. In 1923, before any of this was studied by universities, before anyone had a name for soil microbiology, they just knew. Because their grandfathers knew. Because their grandfathers' grandfathers knew. And one Pennsylvania agent wrote it down before the chemical companies could erase it. You can make that brew this weekend. The ingredients cost under $15 total at any feed store. You can apply it to your existing lawn, no matter how old your house is, no matter how compacted your soil is, and by next summer you will see a difference that will make you wonder what else they hid from you. You didn't lose this knowledge, it was taken from you, and now you have it back. If you're the kind of man who believes that real wisdom has been quietly pushed aside so that someone in a corner office could sell you a bag of fertilizer every spring for the rest of your life, then you already understand what just happened here. I want to know something. When you make the autumn brew this October, what are you going to do with the money you used to spend on chemical fertilizer? Tell me in the comments. I read every one and I want to hear it. Don't just think it, write it down where I can see it. And if you want to keep recovering what was taken from us, subscribe and stay with me. Because the next video is about a method the Amish use to keep their root cellars at 52 degrees year-round without electricity in houses built before the Civil War. You're not going to believe how simple it is. But before we get to that, I want to take you deeper into the story of how this lawn knowledge survived when so much else was lost, because the history matters as much as the recipe. The bulletin I mentioned, the one from the Lancaster County Agricultural Extension Agent, was not the only document of its kind. Between 1908 and 1934, there were at least 47 separate publications produced by county agents across Pennsylvania, Ohio, and Indiana that recorded what they called the practices of the plain people. Most of these documents were printed in small runs of 200 to 500 copies, distributed at county fairs and grange meetings, and then forgotten. The man who compiled the Lancaster Bulletin was named Elias Bowman, and he worked as an extension agent from 1911 until his death in 1939. He was not Amish himself. He was a Lutheran from Reading who had grown up watching his Mennonite neighbors and who became convinced, over the course of 3 decades of work, that the methods being taught at the new agricultural colleges were inferior to the methods being practiced in the fields he drove past every day. Bowman wrote in the introduction to his 1927 bulletin that he had spent 11 years trying to convince the plain farmers to adopt the new commercial fertilizers being promoted by the land-grant universities. He admitted in print that he had been wrong. He wrote that the Amish and Old Order Mennonite farms in his district consistently outproduced the modernized farms by between 14 and 22% per acre, year after year, drought or rain, and that the soil on those farms got better with each passing season while the soil on the chemically treated farms got worse. He used the word degraded. He said the chemical farms were degrading and the plain farms were building. That bulletin was pulled from circulation in 1936. Not banned, not officially suppressed, just allowed to go out of print and never reissued. The plates were melted down during the metal drives of the Second World War. The few surviving copies sat in basements and attics until a graduate student at Penn State named Margaret Hofstetter found one in 1978 while researching her dissertation on rural Pennsylvania foodways. She made photocopies. Those photocopies got passed around. That is how the recipe survived. One woman, one dissertation, one box of photocopies in a university library that almost nobody ever checked out. I tell you all of this because I want you to understand that what you are holding in your hands when you mix that autumn brew is not a trick, it is not a hack, it is not a hot new gardening trend invented by some influencer with a ring light. It is a piece of working knowledge that survived 3 depressions, 2 world wars, the entire post-war chemical revolution, and the deliberate indifference of an agricultural establishment that had every financial reason to let it die. You are participating in something older and more stubborn than the lawn care industry itself. Now, let me tell you what actually happens in your soil when you apply that brew in October, because the why matters. And once you understand the why, you will never look at a bag of synthetic fertilizer the same way again. When the molasses hits the soil, it does something that no chemical fertilizer can do. It feeds the bacteria. Specifically, it feeds the heterotrophic bacteria, the ones that need carbon to live, the ones that do the actual work of turning dead organic matter into plant-available nutrients. A teaspoon of healthy soil contains somewhere between 100 million and 1 billion bacteria. A teaspoon of soil that has been hammered with synthetic nitrogen for 20 years contains maybe 1 million. The chemical fertilizers do not feed the soil. They feed the plant directly, which sounds efficient until you realize that you are bypassing the entire biological system that makes soil work in the first place. It is like feeding a man through an IV for 40 years and then wondering why his stomach has stopped working. The fish emulsion in the brew adds the nitrogen, but it adds it in a form that the bacteria can process slowly over weeks and months rather than dumping it all at once. The kelp adds trace minerals, more than 70 of them, including the ones that synthetic fertilizers do not bother with because they are not legally required to be on the label. Boron, molybdenum, cobalt, selenium, the minerals that grass needs in tiny amounts but cannot live without. The horsetail tea, which Bowman recorded as a common addition in Lancaster County by 1923, provides silica, which strengthens the cell walls of the grass blades and makes them resistant to fungal disease. You do not need a fungicide if your grass has enough silica. The grass defends itself. And the compost tea, the most important part, the part that the Amish farmers Bowman interviewed considered non-negotiable, that is what inoculates the soil, with the fungi and protozoa that complete the biological cycle. Mycorrhizal fungi extend the effective root system of your grass by a factor of 10 or more. A blade of grass with healthy mycorrhizal associations can reach water and nutrients from 10 times the soil volume that an unassociated blade can reach, which means it does not wilt in July, which means it does not turn brown in August, which means you do not have to water it every 3 days while your neighbor stands in his driveway with a hose, watching his sprinkler system fail to keep up with the heat. Bowman recorded the case of a farm in Strasburg, Pennsylvania, owned by a man named Jacob Stoltzfus, that went through the drought of 1,930 without losing a single acre of pasture. The neighboring farms, which had been on commercial fertilizer for 6 and 7 years by that point, lost between 40 and 60% of their grass. Stoltzfus had been applying the autumn brew, or a variation of it, every fall for 31 years. His pasture in August of 1930 was, according to Bowman's notes, ankle-deep and green, in a year when most of the county was the color of straw. Stoltzfus told Bowman that his grandfather had taught him the recipe in 1899 when he was 14 years old, and that his grandfather had learned it from a Swiss immigrant named Yoder who had brought it from the old country in the 1840s. So, when you make this brew, you are reaching back at least 180 years, and probably much further than that, into a chain of practical knowledge that crossed an ocean and survived, because men taught their sons, and sons taught their grandsons, and one Lutheran extension agent in Reading thought it was worth writing down before it disappeared. Now, I want to address something that comes up every time I talk about this on the channel. There is always somebody in the comments who says, "This is just compost tea. My grandmother knew about compost tea. Why are you making such a big deal out of this?" And the answer is that it is not just compost tea. The autumn brew is a specific formulation with specific proportions applied at a specific time of year for specific biological reasons. Compost tea by itself, made wrong, can actually harm your soil. If you brew it too long, if you let it go anaerobic, if you apply it at the wrong temperature, you can introduce pathogens. The plain farmers knew this. Bowman recorded that the Amish brewers he interviewed in 1925 were specific about brewing time between 36 and 48 hours, and specific about water temperature between 60 and 72 degrees Fahrenheit, and specific about aeration, which they accomplished by stirring with a wooden paddle 3 times a day. They did not have microscopes. They did not have lab equipment. They had 200 years of accumulated observation, and they knew that if you brewed it too long, it smelled wrong, and if it smelled wrong, it would hurt the field instead of helping it. The other thing they knew, and this is important, is that you have to apply it in the fall, not the spring. Every garden center in America will sell you a spring fertilizer program. Every commercial lawn care company will show up at your door in April with a bag full of synthetic nitrogen. And it works in the short term because the grass is waking up and it gobbles up the nitrogen and turns green fast. But spring fertilization is the worst thing you can do for long-term lawn health. It forces top growth at the expense of root growth. It makes the grass dependent on the next application, and it does nothing to build the soil. The Amish always fertilized in the fall, between the first week of October and the first hard frost, because that is when the grass is sending energy down into the roots. That is when the soil biology is most receptive. That is when you can build something that lasts. Bowman wrote, and I am paraphrasing here because the exact passage is a little dense, that the plain farmers considered spring fertilization to be a sign of impatience, and impatience to be a sign of poor husbandry. A farmer who needed to make his fields green in April was a farmer who had failed to build his soil the previous October. The autumn brew was applied once a year, in fall, and that was enough. Some farms applied it every other year. The Stoltzfus farm in Strasbourg, the one that survived the 1930 drought, applied it every 3rd year because by that point the soil was so biologically rich that more frequent applications were unnecessary. Think about that for a second. Once every 3 years. Compare that to your current lawn care program. 4 applications a year, sometimes 6, sometimes 8. If you have signed up for one of those premium packages that includes grub control and crabgrass, pre-emergent and fall winterizer and spring starter and summer maintenance, the chemical companies have you on a schedule that requires their product to be applied between 4 and 8 times per year, forever, for the rest of your life, and the schedule will never end because the grass will never become independent. That is by design. That is the business model. The Amish business model, if you can even call it that, was to do the work once and then not have to do it again for 3 years. Imagine running a lawn care company on that model. You would go out of business in 6 months, which is exactly why no lawn care company has ever, in the history of the industry, recommended the autumn brew to its customers. I want to tell you about another man Bowman interviewed because his story stuck with me when I first read the bulletin. His name was Abram King, and he farmed 47 acres outside of Intercourse, Pennsylvania. Bowman visited him in October of 1924 during the brewing season. King had a 55-gallon oak barrel in his barn, and he was stirring it with a paddle that had been carved by his father. The barrel had been used for the same purpose for 61 years. King told Bowman that the wood of the barrel had become, in his words, alive with the brew, and that he believed the barrel itself contributed to the success of the formulation because it carried the biology of every previous batch. We would call that a starter culture today. We would call that the same principle that makes sourdough bread work, or yogurt, or sauerkraut. Abram King did not know the word biology. He did not know what a bacterium was. He knew that the old barrel made better brew than a new barrel, and he knew that you never washed it with soap, only rinsed it with rainwater, and he knew that if you took care of the barrel would take care of you. That is the kind of knowledge that does not show up in a peer-reviewed journal. That is the kind of knowledge that you can only get by doing the same thing for 61 years and paying attention. You do not need a 61-year-old oak barrel to make the autumn brew. A 5-gallon plastic bucket from the hardware store will work fine. But I want you to think about Abram King the next time you stir your bucket, because what you are doing connects you to him and to his father, and to the Swiss immigrants who brought this knowledge across the Atlantic in wooden ships. You are not just feeding your lawn. You are participating in a tradition that the chemical companies tried very hard to make you forget. Let me give you some more specifics on the application because I have gotten questions about this and I want to be clear. The Brew goes down at a rate of 1 gallon per 1,000 square feet of lawn. If you have a quarter-acre lot that is roughly 10,000 square feet of grass, so you need 10 gallons of Brew, you can make that in 2 5-gallon buckets, brewed simultaneously over a 48-hour period. You apply it with a watering can if you are doing a small area, or with a pump sprayer with the filter removed if you are doing a larger area. You apply it in the evening after the sun is off the grass, because ultraviolet light kills the soil microbes you are trying to introduce. You do not apply it before a heavy rain because it will wash off. You apply it when the soil temperature is between 50 and 65 degrees Fahrenheit, which in most of the country means the second or third week of October. After you apply it, you do nothing. You do not water it in, you do not rake it, you do not mow for at least 7 days. You let it sit. The biology needs time to establish itself, and every time you disturb the soil surface in the first week, you set back the process. The Amish farmers Bowman interviewed all said the same thing. After application, the field rests. That is the phrase they used. The field rests. We have lost the concept of rest in modern lawn care. Everything is constant intervention, constant feeding, constant correction. The plain farmers knew that the most important part of growing something was knowing when to leave it alone. By the following spring, you will see the difference. The grass will green up 2 to 3 weeks earlier than your neighbor's lawns because the soil biology will already be active when the air temperatures rise. The blades will be thicker. The color will be a deeper green, not the artificial neon green of a chemically fed lawn, but the dark, almost blue-green of pasture grass that is drawing minerals from a living soil. By June, you will notice that you are mowing less often, because healthy grass grows at a more even rate rather than the burst and crash cycle that synthetic nitrogen causes. By August, when your neighbor's lawn is brown and crispy, yours will still be green, because the root system you built last October will be reaching down 4, 5, 6 inches into the soil to find water that the shallow, rooted chemical lawns cannot reach. And by the second year, after one more application in October, you will start to see something almost miraculous. The weeds will begin to disappear. Not because you killed them, but because the soil conditions that favor weeds, compaction, low biology, imbalanced nutrients will be gone. Dandelions thrive in soil that is low in calcium and high in potassium. Crabgrass thrives in soil that is hot, dry, and biologically dead. Clover, if you consider clover a weed, which the Amish never did, fixes nitrogen and indicates a need for it. When the soil is balanced and biologically active, the weeds simply have no advantage anymore, and they retreat. Bowman recorded that the plain farms in his district averaged what he called weed pressure of less than 3% of total ground cover, while the chemically treated farms averaged between 14 and 31% weed pressure depending on the year. The Amish farmers were not pulling weeds. They were not spraying herbicides, which did not exist in their modern form until after the Second World War anyway. They were simply maintaining soil conditions in which their desired plants had every advantage and the undesired plants had none. That is the whole secret. That is what was hidden from you. You can spend $300 a year on herbicide, or you can spend $15 a year on the autumn brew and let the soil sort it out. There is one more thing I want to mention before we close, and it has to do with the long term. I have been making the autumn brew on my own property for the last 7 years. I started with a lawn that had been on a commercial chemical program for over a decade before I bought the house. The soil was, when I tested it, almost lifeless. The organic matter content was under 1%. Healthy soil should be between 4 and 6% organic matter. I applied the brew that first October in 2017, and I have applied it every October since. Last fall, I tested the soil again. The organic matter was 3.8%. In 7 years, I had nearly quadrupled the organic matter in my soil. The earthworm count, which I did by digging a square-foot test pit, went from 2 worms to 41 worms. The lawn has not received a single application of synthetic fertilizer or herbicide in those 7 years. It is greener than every lawn on my street. My water bill in July is half of what my neighbors pay. and I have not pulled a dandelion in 4 years. That is what happens when you stop treating the symptom and start treating the system. That is what the chemical companies do not want you to discover, because once you discover it, you do not go back. You do not need their product anymore. You become, in the language of their marketing departments, a lost customer. And the Amish, who never were their customer in the first place, just keep doing what they have been doing for 200 years, watching the rest of us run on a treadmill we paid for ourselves. So, make the brew this October. Write down the date you applied it. Take a photograph of your lawn before you do it, and take another photograph in the same spot next June. Send them to me if you want. I would love to see them. And remember that you are not alone in this. There are men all over this country, quietly, in their backyards, mixing 5-gallon buckets of molasses and fish emulsion and kelp and compost, reclaiming a piece of knowledge that was almost lost.